class this morning. Good morning to those of you online as well. Welcome to our class. It's a beautiful snowy day here in Merlin, Oregon, and we're glad that you're joining us. My name is John. I'll be the host today for our class with Guy Finley. If you're new, our agenda this morning will be, in a moment, Guy will present about a 60-minute talk on the topic that you see outlined on your screen below you, and then afterwards, when he's done, we'll take a short break and then come back for an open discussion with you, with the students in the room, about the material that Guy presented today, where you can talk directly to Guy, ask him questions, and share whatever you wish to further your understanding of the material in your own spiritual work. So please do stay for that whole session. That will last for about up till 11 o'clock, so about an hour and a half. And then typically on Sundays, after that period of time or so, we oftentimes leave the cameras rolling and allow even more time for the students here who are in the building to continue to share their impressions and continue to share with you as well, if you'd like to stay. During the broadcast, if you can communicate to us, you can send comments and questions that will be relayed through me to Guy during the broadcast, so feel free to talk to us if you wish during using the GoToWebinar control panel. Just enter something in the question box and it gets relayed during the class to me. And you can also use that to talk to us if you need any help with any technical issues as well, and we'll be happy to clear things up as best as we can. I think we're ready to start class today. Guy has asked me to read the topic and the first of the two key lessons that he has written for us today. So here is our topic for this morning. Shatter the illusion of distance between you and the divine. First key lesson reads as follows. Allowing any part of self to act in such a way as to deny yourself a new awareness of yourself, whatever its quality, is the same as refusing your right to realize the limitless depth and breadth of your true self.
Good morning. It wasn't such a bad storm, was it? And hello and good morning to everyone out there, even if it's not morning, whatever time it is. Glad you're here. And I kind of want to set the stage for our study today with something that I was just noodling on over here, waiting for the talk to start, trying to figure out a good way to introduce something that I hope that you will work. If you have to pinch your leg, gently slap your face, keep taking deep breaths, whatever it is that it takes to listen, I urge you to listen. So we've talked a little bit about that one koan, that if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? I know many of you have struggled with that and probably still do. But we've looked at it and we've understood that if there's no one there to hear it, then there can't be a sound. That the ear and the sound go together. No ear, no sound, no ear. They are mutually dependent. Yes? So I've taken the freedom and I asked Buddha if it was okay and he said it was. I've rewritten that koan for you. You might want to write it down. It's our study today. And don't lose your mind when you first hear it. Oh, God. If a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there wishing it didn't, does it create fear or suffering? If a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there wishing it didn't, does it create fear or suffering? You understand a little bit of that, don't you? Somehow my fear and suffering is related to the fact that there's always a wish in me that I'm not present to until the moment when the tree falls, that meets that with instantaneous resistance. And the suffering is not in the fact that the tree fell. The suffering is inherent in the fact that our consciousness has fallen, and we along with it, into a nature that does not understand itself at all. And that's what we're going to look at today. In truth, if you understand anything, you don't need an exercise. I always provide them so that you have something that you can work with as an intention in the day, perhaps to enlarge the lesson that's presented. But when you understand something, by that understanding, you see what you did not understand the moment before from another point of view. And the new point of view allows you to perceive something about your old point of view you couldn't see before. And that's where things begin to change. By attending to the new point of view, it makes clear how you served an old point of view without knowing you were serving it. Everybody understand that? So I want to look at this idea, a couple ideas actually from the New Testament. Ideas that I would, it sounds counterproductive to say this because the language is so loaded. Passages that I would pray that you're able to get past whatever conditioning you have with them, whether in favor of or frightened by. One of the principal notions in all Scripture, East and West, is this idea that without knowing it, a human being is born into captivity. You are born into captivity, period. But you don't know you are born into captivity, and your struggle to escape the pain and conflict of that captivity is what keeps you a captive of the consciousness into which you are born and in which you are made a captive. I'm going to show this to you as best it is given to me to be able to show it to you. But if you will see the fact of it, which you don't need me to spell out, apparently, because it's possible for you to see with great clarity everything that I will reveal in this talk, if you're willing to see it. You've heard the expression, I trust, that if you sell all and follow me, then you will know something of the kingdom of heaven. All of us know something of that. And the word sell, by and large, did not mean to go out and barter. It meant if you will exchange your life and give it up, you will be given another kind of life that you presently don't know and can't until you make this exchange. Because without understanding it, what you will be set free from is the fact that you are serving a will that you do not know you are serving, and that does not serve you every time you incarnate it in your life. And that's why it's so difficult for us to understand anything of the truth, because we forever are sure, even when we have a highfalutin spiritual solution, that we're serving our best interests in doing so. But not understanding the nature that's moved in that moment to try to save itself, we can't recognize that the task is not, as I've been telling you, to save ourselves. The task is to reveal a completely different order of being that is already saved and that doesn't need to take steps to ensure it's consoled and comforted by the Spirit. Understand that? So now I want to ask you, how many of you feel quite often like you may be fighting a losing battle? this is a big part of your spiritual life, is that you have to go in and lock, stock, and barrel, which, by the way, actually is an expression probably from the Civil War. Never thought of it before. Lock, stock, and barrel. The lock on the firearm, in those days they had a lock, and then you'd trigger that thing. Stock was the thing that held the lock, and the barrel was the deal. So you lock, stock, and barrel, you have to go in. Well, I like to work these things out when it comes to me. I hope you're interested. You have to understand presently why this is a losing battle. And I'm going to explain all of that in a few simple sentences, and then we're going to take the rest of our lives to make sure we understand those few simple sentences. That's what this talk is about today. To whatever degree you suspect it's true, and may I assure you it is, we are always trying to end or to escape some form of pain that we're in by the pursuit of some imagined offsetting pleasure. This is the basis of our existence that we don't see. Here's a disturbance, I want peace. Here's a fear, I want security. So we are forever trying to end that negative state by pursuing a positive one that will balance the scale and restore us to this divine flow that we imagine we're in, that's always interrupted by some unwanted condition. Following me? But that path is a dead-end path. There is no pleasure that will ever offset the consciousness that creates fear and pain. Because it is the consciousness that creates the fear and pain that then imagines the pleasure it can call on and identify with to escape the condition it doesn't want. Still with me? So that instead of trying to end this pain, this fear, by pursuing pleasures, we need to understand something that is not given to us to understand by this world. This world wants nothing to do with the understanding that we must have if we're going to finally learn what it means to exchange our life, to enter into this divine flow. We must realize that the realm of pain and pleasure is just a level of consciousness not to be avoided nor cultivated, but seen as such for what it is. We don't understand that the realm of the opposites, fear, security, pain, pleasure, happiness, sorrow, that is a level of consciousness. It is a world, a kingdom that we are presently a captive of, because we don't understand that if we were able to see with clarity that that's a level of being, then the very witnessing of that level of being would be from above it. And then we would enter into another of these kingdoms in which the realm of pain and pleasure, as natural as they are, is okay. It's there, but it doesn't define me. Where fear and security belong to a certain level of consciousness. But I'm no longer a captive of the endless protection of security, let alone the fear of what will happen to it. So that I'm always bouncing back and forth, thinking I've got my hands on one, only to find out I don't have my hands on it at all. That is a level of consciousness, not your consciousness. But an aspect of it that you don't understand is a realm that you have fallen into through identifying with the opposites. And then until you can start recognizing this ceaseless vacillation between yes and no, good and bad, right and wrong, until you actually recognize that this consciousness must vacillate back and forth in order to provide itself with something to do or be, you will be a victim of that consciousness. And that's why I said we are born into captivity. The medicine is bitter, but it heals. And part of my job, because I speak to men and women all over the world, and some are babes barely understanding anything, and others may be further along the road. But even those who are further along the road, or who think they are, we do not understand the gravity of the condition of humanity, not even remotely. Because if I was to say to you, well, do you think you're a captive of a will that you don't understand? You would say, well, no, I'm not. And then I said, well, what about when you spoke to him like that? Was that your will, or did you regret speaking to somebody like that? Well, how about when you sat there at your desk and you got so anxious over what somebody was or wasn't doing? And you're sitting there, your life is in the grip of something terribly painful. Are you telling me that if it was your will, you would agree to go along with being a captive of that? Would you say yes or no? No, obviously, that can't be my will. Well, how about all those regrets I have? Things I did I shouldn't have done. Are you telling me that when you're dragged back into the past and deposited in some heap of unhappy memory, you telling me that that's your will that you do that? Or is it evident, as it should be, that in that moment, somehow or other, you agree to do all of those things without knowing you agree to do them, which makes you a captive of the will that tempts you into entering into that world and experiencing what waits for you there? Yes or no? To understand, and I know how hard it is. It's very difficult to even speak of it. But you are not and have not been created to be a captive of a consciousness whose every whim, every wind that passes through it, pro and con, for and against, that like some weather vane with no awareness of what it's pointing to, you're moved to look at what you want or don't want, and then when you look at what you want, the wind changes and you can't help but see what you don't want. And whipped around like that, you don't see it, you're whipped around, you are whipped. And until a man or a woman begins to actually recognize that, there's no chance for anything to change, because I will continue to struggle with what I call the wind. The wind isn't the problem. The wind is natural. The changing tides, the conditions, moving in and out, creation unfolding, that's not the problem. The problem is that all of that falls on a part of us that we don't understand. And importantly, as this little story will help explain, one of the reasons why we remain a captive of that consciousness. Nice little story, loosen it, lighten it up a little bit. Boy, you start talking about human beings, about desire, and you can see they don't desire to hear that. Here's a small line of dedicated aspirants waiting to be interviewed by a master who everybody, at least in that relative realm, knows that this is a fairly tough teacher, but that he always brings to the table exactly what the student needs to know if they want to be free. And you only go through this, who in their right mind would go through struggling not just to end the surreptitious freedom that we have, but having to give that up, having to exchange all of that identity and the things it's identified with for something that you can't even see? Who in their right mind would do that unless there was some degree of suspicion that I am a captive? How many of you, I'm just curious, how many of you at least will acknowledge to some extent that you're a captive, and it just whenever it comes, it takes you? Okay. So here are these students, they're waiting, and there's still a little line, there's a door they go through, and as one of the students who was a couple, man and woman, waiting to see the master, they're standing there, one by one, the door flies open and a student comes running out. No, absolutely not. Door closes, another one goes in, door open, flies open, here comes another student. He doesn't know it, he's a liar, run if you can. And then the door closes, another one come in. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You get the drift. And as each one's running by, finally one of the couple, with the man and with the woman who are waiting to go see, they're getting a little bit nervous, obviously. So one of them grabs one of the guys that's running out. He says, hold on. So just stop for a second. I thought as we were standing here that you said you wanted to know the secret of liberation. You wanted to know the truth that sets you free. Here's where we have a chance to get the new understanding. If that's so, what happened? Why are you running away like this? And the man looks at him, he says, because I don't want to know that. And then he keeps running. I want to know everything except that. I want to know what's wrong with you. And I even want to know what's wrong with me as long as I have some way to sit and fight with it so I can dream about being free. But you show me something about myself that I don't want to know and over which I have no known power, but must come upon an understanding it through a work of my own. That's another story altogether. Color me gone. And that's what happens to most men and women in this work, I might add. The split second that they start to realize there's something they do not know about themselves, and to find out that truth about themselves that sets them free is going to cost them something that was unimaginable when they set out on that path. And you know what it costs? Me. What I have called me, because that's what we're looking at in our talk today. So, perhaps you've seen it yourself. I mean, don't you think it's strange? There are some things that we suspect are true about ourselves. How many of you have suspicions about our relationships with others? And then there are some things that I don't really want to know. Because to really know something as true, I'm going to have to look at my life through another set of eyes that deny the truth of what I see. For instance, I deny the truth that my consciousness is responsible for the experience I have, not what you do. I deny that because I don't know what to do with the pain I'm in when you act out what you act out. So it has to be you, and I don't want to know that it's not you, that you are that if the tree, what was that little saying? If the tree falls in the woods and there's no one wishing it didn't, does it create pain? Because suddenly I start to see it. I am complicit with every last moment of conflict in my life. And if I'm actually complicit with this conflict, what in the name of God is it that's complicit that way? What is it that doesn't want to see the truth, in other words? Listen to this. I'll try to read it briefly. Chuang-Tzu, an old Zen monk, long time ago, he wrote this. It's translated. With wood from a 100-year-old tree, they make sacrificial vessels covered with green and yellow designs. The wood that was cut away lies unused in the ditch. If we compare the sacrificial vessels with the wood in the ditch, we find them to differ in appearance. One is more beautiful than the other, yet they are equal in this. Both have lost their original nature. So if you compare the robber and the respectable citizen, you find that one is indeed more respectable than the other, yet they agree in this: both have lost the original simplicity of man. How did they lose it? Here are the 5 ways. Love of colors bewilders the eye and it fails to see right. Love of harmonies bewitches the ear and it loses its true hearing. Love of perfumes fills the head with dizziness. Love of flavors ruins the taste. Desires unsettle the heart until the original nature runs amok. These are the 5 enemies of true life. Yet these are what men of discernment claim to live for. They are not what I live for. If this is life, then pigeons in a cage have found happiness. Love of colors bewilders the eye. Love of harmonies bewitches the ear. Love of perfumes, the dizziness. Love of flavors ruins the taste. Now, he wasn't talking about love. He's saying the desire for an identification with makes enemies out of our five senses. Because in identifying with the senses and what they want and desire in order to sustain us and keep that sense of self in place, the more we identify with them, the more we are what? A captive of that consciousness. Do you understand that passage from Chuang Tzu? Now, we have heard an idea like this many, many times. In the New Testament again, in Matthew, Christ said, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." Now, we've talked about that quote before, but we're going to look at it even more deeply today. When Christ said you cannot serve two masters, he was not talking about two individual masters, but rather he was referring to a lower level of consciousness that, because it is divided, is forever seeking to make itself whole. Those are the two masters. An unconscious nature that, because it is divided, keeps imagining and then desiring what it needs to complete itself. That is the two masters. Desire, the consciousness that gives rise to it because of its divided nature, that's the master, the two masters. You understand that? And that consciousness does what? It keeps coming up with, here's the problem, here's the solution. Here's the suffering, here's the consolation. Here's what I don't have, here's what I have to have. Imagining every time that it bounces off of what it says is bitter, that it's going to bounce into the sweetness it's imagined, failing to see that for all of the activity over millennia, it is incapable of completing itself as imagined. It just keeps pushing the rock up the hill and then having to push it up again. Please, it's such an important point. I want to make sure you understand that. Yes? That nature, that unconscious nature, has become our master, where we enact its desire, we enact its will of the moment, depending on what that is, and then spend our lives in service to it. Now, again, maybe you suspect that might be true, maybe you don't. But I want you to understand this idea that you cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon, in the original meaning of the word, was not just the idea of wealth or someone who had wealth. Mammon represented an individual who was possessed by an insatiable appetite for an identity based on wealth. That's an important distinction to understand. That there is something inside of us that always wants to have what it calls security. It's natural in one world to have security. This is what's so hard about talking. Because I said to you that we are captives of a kingdom where pleasure and pain, security and fear, these are kind of occurring naturally opposites. Like a Ferris wheel, they go round and round. You can't stop one from coming. You can't keep one from not. And it's a level of consciousness, but when you live at that level of consciousness, all you are is at the top of the wheel or the bottom of the wheel. And then because the wheel keeps moving, you keep trying to adjust your position in the conditions that are creating that sense of self. You see? So we spend our lives. You cannot serve God and mammon. The word God in the Aramaic was theos, T-H-E-O-S, which represents the Trinity, meaning the active, passive, and reconcile. You cannot serve your natural relationship to this creative endeavor on part of what is divine and serve at the same time the tyrant. The Trinity and the tyrant, those are the options. But we don't know the Trinity because we serve the tyrant, believing because we've named what it promises to be heaven. In Egypt, when the Jews were the captives, were they not captives? By the way, the word Egypt in the Aramaic means the dark land. A consciousness asleep to itself, run by who? Pharaoh, the tyrant. And what was the principal aim of the tyrant? No, why did he want to enslave the people? So that because they could then build for him edifices made in his own image. And being a slave to the tyrant, and then told if they don't do what the tyrant tells them to do, they're going to have to make bricks without straw. What do you think you and I do every single time that we answer the interior tyrant that says, you've got to be this, you've got to do that, this can't be like? What do you think you're doing? I'm actually making bricks without straw. They're going to crumble. They cannot stay in place because they're made without real substance. Just as everything that desires imagines that will give me substance, make me have gravitas, just as every last bit of that I imagine and identify with has never brought that to pass. Because the wind changes. Sorry for the mixed metaphors. But everything changes and everything crumbles. Yes or no, please. That nature doesn't care anything for you. When you long for something, you're desiring whatever it may be you're desiring. Maybe you want somebody to love you. You want someone to confirm what a good person you are. You want to look in the mirror and see, well, it's not that bad. That when you get older, that's what you think. By the way, speaking of that, have you ever looked in the mirror and not wanted to see what you see in it? Yes or no? See, you never think to yourself, well, what? I mean, that's what's there. What in the name of God doesn't want to look at what is? What in the name of God doesn't want to look at what is? What in the name of God doesn't want to see the world the way it is? And you say, well, I do want. No, you don't. What you want to see is what you resist and resent. If you were to see the way the world is, you would understand the world is the way it is because no one wants to see the way the world is because no one wants to see the will that they serve. I made a note driving over here this morning. I'm going to touch on it quickly. Do you know why there's scarcity in this world? This is stunning if you can hear it. Do you know why there's scarcity? Anybody, why is there scarcity? Well, see, but what creates greed? Scarcity. Imagined scarcity creates scarcity. The run at the markets here in the United States, where we have more blessings physically than any place else. Oh my God, there won't be toilet paper. I better buy 40,000 rolls. What if water? So the imagined scarcity, fear creates scarcity, doesn't it? And what is scarcity and the greed other than the idea that I can get rid of my fear by getting a lot of that which will take my fear away from me? Isn't that desire? Yes or no? And the will that serves it creates the condition it then condemns. Do you understand how important that is to understand? We talk about the collapse of a field. The whole idea of scarcity collapses the field into something that fear makes. And when fear makes the condition prevalent, then that same consciousness that produced the fear says, now I've got to protect myself from that fear that didn't exist until it was created by a consciousness imagining it wouldn't have what it wants and needs to feel safe and whole. Everybody still following me? I'm not making this too strong, am I? We don't even know that tyrant exists. We don't even know it exists. I can feel some of you, not just in the room. You know how your chest gets all tight sometimes? Some of you right now, full of resistance. Do you understand? You didn't create that. Something has taken your body. Something has taken your emotions. Something has taken your mind. And I mean literally taken it, so that suddenly I'm reduced into something that's feeling this constriction or this confusion. And then the only thing I know to do is to allow the thing that took my life from me to tell me how to get it back. Resist this. Push that off. Brush that away. I don't want to know this. I need to get out of here. Every last movement of the mind that tries to change or escape the condition it's in is created by that consciousness that then tries to rescue itself from its own creation. You following me or not? Does that sound too drastic? Let's look at it. How many of you get angry? Worried? Hold them up for a few minutes. Overcome with anxious thoughts and feelings? Have I missed any? Fear? Does fear ever wash over you? Resentment? Regret? All these negative states, yeah? And can we see that these negative reactions and the states that instrument them, can we see, as we've often discussed, that apparently went into that moment with me before that moment brought that up inside of me. Because the moment can't bring up inside of me what wasn't there before the moment, can it? Cannot. So something happens and it brings this up inside of me, where the next thing I know, I'm angry with somebody, I'm worried, I'm judgmental, I'm resisting, I'm anxious, I'm alone. Now I'm asking you, can that reaction and that subsequent negative state that we become identified, can that exist without me having gone into that moment wanting something from it? Can it? I'm trying to draw a correlation. I'm sitting at my computer, I'm at my work desk someplace, in my car. Car comes pulling up 20 miles an hour faster than the lane I'm in. Suddenly, I begin to feel anger. I'm with you and it doesn't look like you understand what I'm saying. Suddenly I begin to feel impatient. I look at the news, political, physical, climate, fiscal. And not only was I drawn to look at that, but even as I'm drawn to look at that, if it shows me something that I don't want to see, I don't want to look at that, and then I have the experience of resisting the very thing that I was drawn to look at. So that without even beginning to suspect it, my experience of the moment is inextricably connected to a consciousness that knows before the moment has unfolded how the moment should be. It knows it. It doesn't tell me until after the moment isn't what I want it to be. Then I hear holy hell. And then I feel the lash of that tyrant that I was serving without knowing it the moment before, thinking, this is good to do. I should have this. I need more of that. I need to run over here. I need this distraction. I need to eat this, whatever it is. And then I do the will of that nature. And maybe that momentarily satiates that part of me that was driven to do that, but by and large, no matter how quickly or sufficiently satiated, the thing changes. And then I turn into someone I don't even know who he is. Who talks to people like that? walks around with their head bent down, regretting what they said 10 seconds ago or reliving something from 30 years ago? Who does that? Who turns into this flare of impatience, throws something? Who does that? Because the moment before that, there was no you that was going to do there, was that? Was there? No. And if you knew the moment before that that was about to appear, would you be willing and sitting there consenting to give yourself over to some consciousness that flails you and then punishes everyone else around you? Would you do it? You wouldn't. I know we don't want to hear this. That's why I told the story about everybody running away from the teacher. I don't want to know that much. I don't want to know that I walk around the captive of an unconscious body of conditioned desires that I have no say over, but explain to myself endlessly why it is that I do what I do and want what I want and have to have what I have to have. The endless justification of something that has punished me or someone else. Who justifies that? And then if you understand, you begin to recognize that for all intents and purposes, this is exactly what Chuang Tzu was talking about, what Christ, what all of the teachers, Buddha, talking about the Four Noble Truths. Every last teaching, sell all, exchange your life. What do I have to exchange? I have to exchange this consciousness that I'm identified with, and I can't exchange it by myself. The exchange is made through the awareness of the consciousness that is unaware of itself. The exchange is made by the awareness of a consciousness that is unaware of itself. That is the exchange. Not by resisting it. I'm going to get into that in a few moments because a lot of people recently are asking all these questions about, well, what am I supposed to do? I said it out at the beginning. The point is that this nature, how many of you can sense this a little bit? That this nature sits, like, most of you have never scuba dived, but those of you who have ever scuba dived or snorkeled, they're a moray eel. Moray eels are, some of them are massive, and they have this big gaping maw. Always looks like they're trying to bite you because they breathe by taking water in through their mouth like that. This nature is like a moray eel sitting in the cave of an unconscious nature, and it just waits to come out. And the point isn't that it comes out, the point is that it's always there and we don't know it. We don't suspect its existence. We don't suspect that the reaction I'm about to have that's going to blame you or punish you for what you said or done, we don't suspect that that's already built into that consciousness because it demands that you be and say and do what it is that it wants you to be and say and do to confirm its image of itself, to allow it to remain feeling whole and complete. And the point is, if you're following this, it's not your consciousness. It is a feature of consciousness. It is not your consciousness. It is a level of consciousness. Do you understand that as long as I live there, that's the whole of my world, isn't it? I see something, I don't like it. I don't like it, I got to figure out how to like it. How to get around it, how to change it, to control it, escape it. And then I do that. And then I have a moment's peace because that particular condition that triggered that consciousness goes downstream. But the consciousness didn't go downstream, did it, with passing time? This consciousness doesn't pass with time, does it? This consciousness creates time. Because what is time other than the effort, the space and distance between what I want and don't want? That's what time is. I need time to get away from a consciousness that creates it. Isn't that what you're doing? Isn't that when you get negative and try to fix someone, or you have an idea, a plan, what to do about this problem? Aren't you buying time? Yes or no? How much time do you think you can buy? And can you actually buy time? Or do you buy the illusion of a possibility that never proves itself? We know the answer, don't we? Yes or no? So even though we don't understand it yet, and this is the next important part, whatever the desire of that moment may be, we are passive to it. Whatever the desire is of the moment, we are passive to it, which means we are passive to the activity of that consciousness. Because as it gets, here I am, I'm feeling pretty good, and then I look at the news, I see your face, I drive down the street, I see something I don't want to see. I'm sitting there, I'm merrily downstream, and then all of a sudden, I'm in some kind of rapids, and I got to row my boat to get to safety, yes? So in that moment, I am a passive captive to the appearance of any desire. Let's go slow. Passive to the appearance of a desire. How does that mean? Do you not feel threatened by anything that isn't the way you want it? Now, did I know I would feel threatened prior to that moment that challenged what I wanted? So suddenly I feel threatened. Suddenly, what is the nature of my will in that moment other than to what? Change, control, or escape what has challenged what I didn't even know I was identified with. I didn't know I was identified, and then you fill in the blanks. It's not important. The thing to remember here is that as long as I am passive to that consciousness is going to determine for me the content of my experience. As long as I'm passive to that consciousness, my experience is going to be determined by it. Look, here I am. I don't know I'm about to feel this way. You say this, suddenly I feel that way. Why do I feel that way? Because I'm passive. I don't understand that identity that's appeared in that moment that felt threatened is now my identity. I have become actively identified with a passive I, something that was produced inside of me in that moment. I had no idea was there, and now I'm identified with it. Yes or no? And I remain, by the way, identified with it. And it goes through these ceaseless iterations, does it not? Okay, this is good, I want that. I don't want that. I want this, I don't want that. Vacillating back and forth and back and forth. And my identity is inextricably tied up in that. That's the whole point I'm trying to get to see. My identity is tied up. The feeling of myself. And why is the feeling of myself tied up into that? Because I believe it is me who's active in that moment. When you're negative, trying to figure out how to fix things, don't you believe that it is you who is actively working on that problem? Yes or no? Yes. But the me that's actively working on the problem didn't exist until suddenly that desire was challenged. Then there's an I there. It says, I've got to handle this. I've got to take control. I must put this down. I can't go along with that. So here I am. And here's this new strong sense of I that is a passive response to a challenged desire. It is the effect of a condition that challenged something I was identified with. Can the effect of a moment change the moment that gave rise to it? It cannot. One of the difficulties of this talk, and I knew it would be, is that there's no way a person can begin to even suspect, let alone start to explore this captivity until they feel it. And most of us doesn't want to feel it. Because when we feel, for instance, the onset of a fear, we don't think to ourselves, we're a captive of a consciousness that's so attached to and identified with a particular desire that now I'm in the hands of something that's driving me to try to save it. Do you think that to yourself? Those are a lot of words, isn't it? Like a salad. But is that the fact or not? Why don't I want to see whatever it is I don't want to see? Why don't I want you to be whatever it is that you are? Please, God. Why do I see you coming and I have resistance just looking at you? Why, when certain things are going this way, do I not want to look at the way they're going? Why is that? And if I don't want to see something, am I not a captive of that which covers my eyes and says, don't look? Don't let it be like that. Please, God, no, don't let it be like that. And what a futile prayer that is. Please, I don't want to get old. Please make that person into somebody that I can get along with. Please change this world. Look at the world. Please change it. And I never suspect that I had no thought whatsoever about this person, that world, that condition, until suddenly the wind changed and all of this, up comes this thing that says, I want or I don't want. And then I take the want and don't want and the fluctuation of the opposites as being I, and it's not I. But until I see it's not I, what is it? I. It's so, all I can do is try to show you. You know those moments where you have to talk to somebody you don't want to talk to? You got to go do something you don't want to go do. You know those moments? You feel the conflict and the resistance to the possibility that you imagine. And because you have that reaction, you imagine that what you're trying to change or avoid or escape is that person or that circumstance. And what you don't know is what you're trying to change or avoid is the consciousness that created the condition you've reacted to. And until you see that, all you can do is spin your wheels. But on the other hand, the immensity of a challenge like that, to suspect that I just keep going on and on and on. And that when these moments come, somehow or other, I believe the moment is separate from the consciousness that experiences it. I believe that. I don't know that I believe that, but that's how I see it. So I'm given to see it that way, and because I'm given to see it that way, and I don't know how else it can be seen, naturally I believe that what I see is the truth. Yes or no? And I'm telling you that what you see when you don't want to see it is not only not the truth, but it's the consciousness that's letting you in on that and trying to use you to keep itself in place. That's what you have to understand. Now, I'm going to read something to you, not the second key lesson, that'll come up after this, but I want you to just think about it. So can you see inside a little bit what we're talking about? And much to like a dean and a host of other students, well, how do I end this? I fight with it all the time. I fight with this addiction. You may not know it. That consciousness is addiction. It's not that it's addicted, it is addiction. And its addiction is to itself. Its addiction is to trying to complete itself through what it imagines is separate from itself. So it's forever trying to meld itself into something that will make it whole when the thing is divided to begin with. That consciousness is addiction itself. And it keeps doing what? It keeps coming up with what it imagines it has to do to escape the action and content of itself, which it can't do. Listen to this, please. If unconscious desire is the root of all suffering, can you see that much with me? If unconscious desire is the root of all suffering, then we should know that whatever we desire to escape can't possibly do anything to change or transcend our relationship to it. I'll read it again. If unconscious desire is the root of suffering, and it is, and that unconscious nature is what's to be exchanged, if unconscious desire is the root of all suffering, then we should know that whatever we desire to escape can't, then we should know that whatever we do it. If unconscious desire is the root of all suffering, then we should know that whatever we desire to escape, that pain can't do anything to change or transcend our relationship to that pain. If I'm a captive of unconscious desire, how can another desire and that consciousness save me? It's impossible. And there you have it. There's the summation of all the teachings through the ages. Why you're in a fight you can't win. It's what it means to be a captive of a consciousness that you can't see, because the consciousness keeps giving you eyes that it lets you see what it needs to do. Now we'll bring up the second key lesson. I hope this will make sense to you now. Resistance to any form of painful desire is how that desire ensures its fire never goes out. To see the truth of this revelation is the first step required of anyone who seeks to be released from their unconscious relationship with this self-induced form of suffering. No one believes that their suffering, psychological suffering, is self-induced. That's why only conscious suffering can begin to change your relationship with the nature that it's identified with itself. How can we say that suffering of a psychological nature is self-induced? Because I can't go into a moment and have a negative reaction to it unless I wanted something from that moment before I went into it. So the desire that went into that moment with me is responsible for that negative reaction, and that desire has no authority unless I'm identified with it. That's self-induced suffering. Do you understand that? If we no longer want the experience of being angry or afraid, what do we have to do? This is the last part of the talk. I'm sitting at my computer. I look at the political, the geophysical, the fiscal news. I get an email from my doctor following up a report telling me he wants to talk to me. I see an email from somebody, and before I even read the email, I'm reacting to their name. Do you, yes or no? Well, how am I ever going to be free of being gripped, being made a captive of a will that waits inside of me, that already knows what the moment means before I even do, and then tells me who I am and what to do about it? How am I ever going to be free of that? I'm going to have to realize that that's the fact. I can't be passive in my own life anymore. Your very divine possibility is threatened by unconscious passivity. I feel a fear. I'm passive to the consciousness that produces it. I feel anger towards you. I'm passive to the consciousness that tells me you need to be other than you are. I'm anxious as hell. What's going to happen? I'm passive to something that has imagined its security and that feels threatened now by a condition it can't control. I'm passive. My I is born out of passivity. So that's a new word, passivity. Passivity. Passive I. As long as I live from that passive I that is the creation of that unconscious nature, I will live out the content of that consciousness that cannot escape itself because it creates itself with everything it does to try to do so. I don't know if I can say it better than I've said, at least at this point. We're just looking. You don't know whether there's another I, whether there's another nature in relationship with something altogether different and divine. If, as long as that passive I appears when the desire is thwarted and you say I to it and then let it tell you who you are and what to do, how will you ever know that that's just a level of consciousness? Do you understand? Because then I'm in that world. I'm in the dream of that world. And it is a dream, literally. And the only way I will ever be free of the dream of that world is that I'm going to have to go into those moments knowing my tendency, my proclivity to dream. And then whatever the cost, shake myself awake for just long enough to recognize, wait a minute, I'm agreeing to feel this fear. I'm agreeing to feel this anxiety. I'm agreeing to feel angry. I'm agreeing to feel lonely, left out. I'm agreeing to feel sorry for myself. And when you start to see that only a man or a woman asleep and in the hands of a will producing that kind of content, only someone who is passive to the will of that unconscious nature would ever derive their self from it. Then you have a chance to start struggling with it. Remember we talked about this in a talk recently, 1 degree of light, 1 degree of effort, 1 degree of understanding brought into that moment changes the entire construct, the field of that moment. That's what we're talking about. Can I be willing just in that moment where I feel that fear, instead of letting that become I through a passive response to it, become actively aware of that passive I, actively aware of that fear, actively aware of that conflict that I'm feeling? Because if I'll become aware of it, I will gain insight into it from a consciousness above the level producing it. Did we touch some base today? Let's take a break. We'll come back and have our dialogue.